Thank you, Jesse Ulrich. And hello, writers. This is our first podcast since WriterCon 2022 finished. Rene, what'd you think of the conference this year?
It was amazing. I think it was our best one. I really do. It was fantastic from start to finish. I loved it. The people were great. There was so much excitement and joy and friendships and
community.
People
supporting each other.
Yeah,
fabulous. One of the biggest announcements coming out of the conference was that in April of next year, we will be relaunching the WriterCon cruise.
Woohoo!
Some of you have been with us for a while may recall that we did a cruise in early 2020, just before the lockdown kicked in. And then, of course, we had to shut down the program because of the pandemic. But now we're back, and we'll be providing more information about this in the future. But you can mark the dates on your calendar right now. It'll be April 9th through 16th. We're departing from Galveston on Royal Caribbean's Allure of the Seas, traveling through the Western Caribbean itinerary, visits Cozumel and Honduras and many other super cool places. I mean, basically, it's one of our small group retreats on the water, and you're on a cruise ship. But we will meet every day. You'll be receiving a personal mentor you talk one-on-one with. There'll be more than 20 hours of classroom instruction focusing on your story idea or your work in progress if you've got one. So you can get away for a little while and focus on your writing all at the same time. Jesse, have you ever been on a cruise?
Oh, I've been on cruises.
Yeah. The Star Trek quiz. We talked about cruise. We talked about that.
And I will be on another Star Trek cruise like 6 weeks before this one. So, which is leaving from California this time instead of Florida. So I get to see the other side of Mexico, which I'm very excited about. Also, it makes it a lot easier for the Star Trek actors, a lot of whom who live in California, to come on said cruise. But yes, sure. I've been on the Allure of the Seas. It's a good ship. Solid ship.
Fantastic. Well, we have a very special interview today with novelist Cai Emmons. She has 2 novels coming out this month, which is Unleashed and Livid. Why 2 novels being released from 2 different publishers at virtually the same time? Well, because on February 4th of last year, she received some absolutely shattering news. She was diagnosed with bulbar-onset ALS, accompanied with a complete loss of her voice, which is why she'll be speaking to us through a voice synthesizer. Deviating from our usual practice, we sent her the questions in advance so she could type out her answers in advance, and you'll hear her replying, but through the voice synthesizer. I mean, this is just emblematic of this woman and her strength and courage. She has not let this interrupt her work at all, not even her PR work and doing interviews. She pushed hard to get both novels finished while she could. She's even doing a blog documenting her experience, and I can't wait to talk to her about all of this. But first, the news. I want to leave lots of time for our guests, but 2 quick news stories first. The first one involves Rakuten Kobo. I probably still didn't get it right, but you know who I'm talking about. They've developed a more eco-conscious way to read. They say they've launched the Kobo Clara 2E, which Jesse's got up on the screen now. The company is describing it as a more eco-conscious e-reader with big upgrades. It's built with an exterior made from more than 85% recycled plastic, including 10% ocean-bound plastic, and it's Kobo's first 6-inch waterproof reader. In official statements, Kobo has said that its commitment, quote, to transition to certified recycled materials wherever feasible while meeting technical product requirements is its goal. They plan to convert more than 200,000 plastic bottles from oceans, more than 1 million CDs and DVDs from landfills all over the course of the year after this goes into production. Okay, Rene, first things first, do you use an e-reader?
You know, I do. When they first came out eons ago, I said, I will never, ever use an e-reader. And
Well,
now
that's what I expected you to say.
Absolutely. I was just like, who would ever use something like this? These won't go anywhere. Now I am so picky on my e-reader. I mean, the buttons have to be just right. Like, it is a whole thing. It has to feel like a book. It's just madness. So, but I love what they're doing, and that's pretty amazing. And I think it'll go far. Yeah.
Yeah, good on them. I mean, we usually talk about Kobo because of the work they do distributing digital books for people, but this is pretty cool. Jesse, you an e-reader user?
Oh, I'm a huge e-reader user. I haven't read a real book. I mean, I guess I have read a real book in the past.
They're still real. They're not imaginary.
No, and here's the thing. I like owning the real book. I just like reading on the e-reader because, one, you don't for example, if you live with someone, you can read on the e-reader while they're sleeping, which is much harder to do if you're trying to read a real book. And two, especially as you get older and your eyesight gets worse, you can make the font as big as you want.
Right.
Absolutely. Yes.
Taking advantage of both of those features.
Yeah.
Surely.
And I have a Kindle, but I've thought about buying a Kobo many times. And one of the reasons I haven't yet is because I've finally figured out how to get library ebooks onto my Kindle. It's not an easy process, but once you set it up, if you can find one, because libraries are only allowed to have 2 versions of an ebook for some reason that we won't get into. It sends you to an Amazon page that then sends it to your Kindle. And one, it's a nice way of still using the library. And two, reading new books. There's something easier about collecting books on your Kindle or Kobo reader to read later than there is buying a lot of books that you then have to find places for. So, and you can read larger books. As listeners to this podcast will know, I read very long fantasy and sci-fi books. It's a lot easier to do on a Kindle. Like, I reread The Lord of the Rings on the Kindle at least once a year. A lot easier to do in Kindle than it is in physical, even though I have multiple Lord of the Rings copies of books. I don't want to damage them.
I will say, though, if I read something on my Kindle and I love it, I'll buy the hardcover.
Yeah.
I will buy the physical.
Yeah.
Yep, I absolutely will.
Yeah. I will say, for fantasy and sci-fi books, the one things e-readers haven't perfected yet is making maps easy to look at. They are very hard to read in e-ink format. So you have to go to the real books for that.
So bottom line question for both of you, would Kobo's eco-friendly, eco-conscious approach to making the reader make any difference when you're deciding what to buy?
I mean, in the maybe 12 years I've been reading on e-readers, I've had 3 Kindles. And so I don't think of them as that much of a electronic waste of electronic waste. I don't think e-readers are a huge problem. I do like companies that are like, why don't we make this out of recyclable materials? It's just a better thing that we should be doing overall. So yeah, I give them props for that, for sure.
Yep. I think they'll do well.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Second story. There are some new books coming out. Bret Easton Ellis, who you may recall from his big hit American Psycho, is releasing his first book in 13 years. And J.K. Rowling, do I really need to tell you what she's written? I think probably not. But she's also got a mystery series that she writes under the pseudonym Robert Galbraith. And this new book is her 6th book in her Cormoran Strike series. The book is called The Ink Black Heart. It is 1,024 pages long, which, as one critic noted, is, quote, 500 pages longer than Dune, 300 pages longer than Infinite Jest, and 100 pages longer than the Bible. But what's actually raising eyebrows is not the length of the book, but that the plot appears to mirror Rowling's own recent experiences when, as you may have read, she took a lot of heat and perhaps lost some fans for expressing what some people considered to be transphobic views. She has said that the book is not based on her own life, even though some of the events that take place in the story did in fact happen to her while she was writing it. This is a quote from her. She said, "I have to say, when it did happen to me, those who have already read the book in manuscript form were like, 'Are you clairvoyant?'" Jesse, what do you think? Do you believe in coincidences of this magnitude?
What I believe is that people obviously put parts of their real life into books that they write in ways they might not even know consciously. I don't think this is a subconscious thing that she wrote. I think she used what was happening to her in a story that she, I guess, thinks is interesting that people would want to read. So, you know, like just how like you could say that the experiences of World War I made their way into the Lord of the Rings, right? Even if Tolkien wasn't thinking about that directly at the time, it's very, you know, almost all writers say parts of themselves manifest in their books in some way or another. So
that's very true. This book also takes a clear aim at, and this is a quote, social justice warriors, and suggests that the cartoonist who becomes the murder victim in the book was a victim of a masterfully plotted, politically fueled hate campaign against her. Obviously, some critics have called this, quote, hilariously self-serving, end quote. Rene, what do you think about all this?
Well, I will tell you, and speaking of coincidences or not, yes. I wrote a book years ago called Listen, and it had a theme of bullying. And I did a lot of research, wrote the book, finished the book, turned it in, and suddenly we were immersed as a family into the world of bullying. My son was severely bullied. I had to take drastic steps in the situation. And so in the 9 months between when the book was written and nothing, I'd never, experienced bullying, to when the book came out and I had this whole experience, and suddenly like the interviews I was doing was so different than what I had expected. They were now, I had personal experience. And in fact, one show had me on and took callers as if I was an expert, which made me nervous because I certainly wasn't an expert. But I think it can happen. In this case, probably not. But in my case, people didn't understand that when I wrote the book, I had no personal experience in bullying. I had a passion for it, but I didn't have the personal experience. And now I do. So
yeah, I can think of times when what was going on in my life crept into books too, but I wasn't unaware of it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I knew exactly what I was doing, so I don't know. Anyway, enough with this. Let's segue to our interview and talk to our very special guest for this podcast, Cai Emmons. Cai, welcome to the podcast. Okay, traditional first question. If you could offer writers one piece of advice, what would it be?
There are two things that have helped me enormously over my writing career. The first is having a regular writing practice. For me, that has meant writing every day, the first thing in the morning when I wake up. I like that time because it's before the world has intervened and toyed with my thoughts. I go straight from the dream world to the page. For other writers, it might be another time. I know some writers who write best at night when everyone else is sleeping. The important thing is to find a time that works for you and hold it sacred. Don't let anyone interfere with it. Treat it like a daily job. This can be challenging early on, to say to people, "No, I can't see you, I'm writing." But it becomes easier over time, and then the writing impulse becomes almost Pavlovian.
Yeah, it's even worse when those are your children complaining and trying to but I'm glad to hear you say that you have a regular...
You spoke something the writer Michael Cunningham once said about how to deal with those moments when you feel stuck. Imagine more deeply, he said. And those 3 words, simple as they are, have helped get me through so many times when my work felt flat and without juice or energy. 3 powerful little words, imagine more deeply.
Congratulations on having 2 books, and despite everything, 2 books coming out in the same month. How are you feeling?
Thank you so much, Bill. Publishing these 2 books has been enormously gratifying. I am fond of them both for different reasons, and I'm really grateful to both publishers, Dutton and Red Hen Press, for speeding up the publication schedules. It has been pure joy to work on the editing and production of both books, and to find creative ways of getting them into the hands of readers beyond conventional bookstore readings. It has also been a wonderful distraction from thinking too obsessively about my disease.
Wow. Okay. So One of your new books, Unleashed, is about a woman whose body undergoes profound changes after her only daughter leaves for college. And yet you started it before you were diagnosed. How did that diagnosis impact the book?
Unleashed was written during the first year of the pandemic when I was just beginning to lose my voice, but I had no idea why. I finished the book around the same time I got my diagnosis. And then I looked back and understood that the story was almost a metaphor for what I had been going through. My body seemed to understand the transformation it was going through in a way my conscious brain did not. I should add that the book has nothing to do with ALS or disease in any way, unless you think about the ways our culture is diseased.
Wow.
And of course, your other book, also coming out from a different publisher this month, is Livid, which also features a mother-daughter relationship, right? But it confronts the anger that simmers in many women, reflecting upon the misogyny and racism that's impacted their life. Where did that story come from?
Livid was inspired by my rage after watching the Kavanaugh confirmation hearings. I couldn't believe the contempt for women that I saw on display there. I was interested in writing not about the headline-stealing examples of how women are seen as second-class citizens, but the small manifestations of misogyny that women endure every day. So in Livid we see two women, and one girl, who suffer in these more minor ways that eventually lead to boiling anger and big trouble.
Wow. Well, we know you did a lot of writing before these two books. Did your writing process change for these two books?
Livid was written before Unleashed, and my writing process was more or less the same as it had been previously, except it was the first time I'd experimented with writing a novel from the first-person point of view, which I have always thought was more difficult than writing from the third person. Once I knew my character Sybil, however, I had a lot of fun writing from her perspective. Unleashed did feel different. The book poured out of me quickly, like a fevered dream. And as I was writing it, it felt so wild that I doubted it would ever be published. But I didn't care. I knew I had to write it anyway. It was a surprise to me that it found its way to publication.
Yeah, well, it tells me that it's a terrific book, and congratulations again. Would you call yourself a planner, or what some people are now calling a discovery writer, meaning someone who plunges in without an outline, basically?
I am somewhere between the planner and the discovery writer. I never begin with an outline. I usually begin with some kind of what-if question. What if a woman is placed on a jury with her ex-husband from whom she is estranged, for example? Or, what if a woman discovers she has the power to change the weather? Then I begin to explore who this character is. And from that exploration and a fuller understanding of the character and the constellation of characters around the main character, the plot emerges. From there I begin to develop a rough structure for the book.
Well, that's interesting, and you've kind of answered the next question, because it doesn't start with an idea, character, or a plot, or something else. So, yeah, so that you've answered that, and that's really interesting.
Well, let me ask a question then. I know that you have been writing, well, for a long time. In fact, I read that at age 7, you wrote a passionate poem about neighbors who opposed desegregation. How did that come about? And of course, what everyone really wants to know, did you share the poem with your neighbors?
I began writing poetry as a young girl, and, like many young kids, I was very worried about the harm I saw being done in the world. My mother was very involved in desegregation in the Boston area, and we talked about it a lot. And so I wrote that poem, an ode to desegregation. I didn't know what an ode was, but I liked the sound of the word. I submitted it to some contest at the Boston Globe, and they published it in the paper.
I love that you didn't know what an ode was. That was fantastic. Kids are awesome. We don't have fear, we just go for it. I love it. I love it. Well, so you're doing a ton of writing, and which is amazing. And I think it's amazing that you are also writing a blog, because that's a lot of work. And it's consistent work. You have to keep it up. So what inspired you to write the blog?
A number of years ago, I thought writing a blog might be up my alley. So I started a blog called The Entangled Writer. I enjoyed writing it, but it had no particular focus. And after a while, I forget how long, I found it hard to sustain, and I let it go. But when I began to lose my voice, I wanted to try to understand what was happening to me. The whole thing seemed so mysterious, and no doctor could diagnose what was wrong for a year. So I started to write a blog again, this time with a very clear focus. And now that I know what the problem is, ALS, I am still interested in charting my voyage to death. I have found that people are interested in the subject, and so I have kept going. I think there isn't enough discussion of death in our culture. Understandably, people tend to be very afraid of talking about it.
I visited your blog this morning, actually, and I thought it was wonderful. I also noticed that a lot of people are reading, and I bet really benefiting from that blog. I also read an interview in which you discussed your illness, and you said, quote, "I feel very much at peace alongside the anger." What do you mean by that?
Well, there's a great deal to be angry about in the world at large right now. Our inability to make a significant dent in climate change, the prevalence of bigotry and misogyny, the rise of dictators. So I'm angry about these things, about all the ways in which our nation seems to be backsliding in terms of compassion and human rights. At the same time, I know my death is approaching in the next couple of years, and I feel very much at peace with that. I have had a wonderful life. I have been fortunate in so many ways. So, if it is my time to go, so be it. At this point, I feel neither fearful nor angry.
Cai, you're extraordinary. Are you working on another book? I'm assuming you are.
I have just finished a draft of a new novel and given it to my first reader, my husband, the superb editor and playwright Paul Calandrino. I trust him completely. He always understands what I'm trying to do, and he enters the work fully and gives me terrific suggestions that I can work with. He loved the novel, but he thought a few places near the end could be sharpened. So I have been working on those places. I would say more about what the novel is about, but I'm too superstitious.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Cai, this has been a real treat. You are an inspiration and a testament to courage and a fabulous writer. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. Hey, just a few parting words. If you missed WriterCon this year, I am so sorry, but guess what? There'll be another one next year. And I will be sure to let you know on this podcast when the website for 2023 is ready so you can sign up at the early bird prices. We'll be providing more information about the cruise too, but you can always email me for details or prices or itinerary or whatever you want. My email address is willbern@gmail.com. That's WILLBERN@gmail.com. And if you haven't joined the WriterCon Facebook group yet, what's wrong with you? I mean, join today and be a part of this wonderful community of writers. If you're enjoying this podcast, please subscribe and then rate or review us wherever you get podcasts. It actually does make it easier for new listeners to discover us and the podcast. And Jesse, if you're watching the video version, has just put up the key addresses and logos up on the screen. You can also find video versions of these podcasts on YouTube. All right. Until next time, keep writing. And remember, you cannot fail if you refuse to quit. See you next time.